already, and now they're on to dessert. Some people are drunk because they brought a beverage and have had three already. It's great. Everything is great. Um, all right, Dan, welcome to Straight White American Jesus. How are you? Are you frustrated? Is this the last episode? Because we just went through like podcast marital issues of like, you couldn't hear me, I couldn't hear you. We're going to throw the computers out the window.
The poor communication skills and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, the joys of technology. So the good news is that like everybody's had to do this before, right? Like that's part of living in a post-COVID world. Everybody's had that thing where they're like talking into the screen and they're like, no, we can't hear you. And all that. So anyway, we're here. Glad to be with you, Brad. Glad to see you and hear you. And obviously glad to be with everybody else who's here.
All right. So we are here to talk about a couple of things. One is it's our bonus episode, so we do want to answer some questions and get to those in a bit. But I want to start today by kind of continuing something that I talked about. I don't know. I think last weekly roundup or the one before that, and it kind of struck a nerve with some people. Some people commented on it. Some people had ideas of their own, and so I wanted to continue the thread, throw some thoughts at you, and see what you think here. So let me go to something that came out today, and that is from the Roosevelt Institute, which is a kind of left-leaning think tank kind of place, but it's a report that they put out from about 2024 and about the Biden administration, and it includes a lot of Biden former officials chiming in about what went wrong. Okay. And here's the general sentiment from this report. It's that the Biden administration had the chance to do big things, and instead they chose incremental policy solutions. And so I think there was this whole line of kind of stuff that came out from the Biden administration about one sec. That came out from the Biden administration about like what they accomplished, the CHIPS Act, the stuff that happened with child tax credit. Like, there's all the things that you can go down the line and say, this is what they did. Right. And we talked about it on the show. Those things were helpful. They were good. They were positive. What seems to have been true then, and I think we all knew that then, and what is definitely something we can see in retrospect now, is that they didn't feel big. The perception on the ground was not something that included a kind of visceral change in people's lives, even though you could say, if you were Gavin Newsom or any other person who wanted to like tout the accomplishments of what Biden was doing, is like, this is positive. Okay. So here's a quote from the report. The long-running undercutting of the government's capacity to solve national problems. Everyone underline that. To solve national problems is not just a bureaucratic problem. It is a democratic one. Because democratic legitimacy requires a government capable of speedily and visibly responding to ordinary Americans' aspirations and discontent. FDR warned, democracy has disappeared in several other great nations, not because the people of those nations disliked democracy, but because they had grown tired of unemployment and insecurity, of seeing their children hungry while they sat helpless in the face of government confusion and government weakness through lack of leadership in government. This is what I was driving at whenever I talked about democracy is an empty signifier. So here's what I said on the weekly roundup the other day. Democracy is an empty signifier. And I said that ahead of the No Kings rallies on the 17th of weekly roundup. The rallies were the 18th. What I meant was democracy, when you say to the young person who's 21, when you say to the person who lives in the Midwest, who's 36 and has 2 kids, when you look at the person who's 58 and trying to retire in Ohio or in Georgia, hey, let's save democracy together. My argument was not that democracy is bad or that most people are just like, yeah, democracy is the worst. Let's do something else. There are those people out there. There are monarchists and dictator wannabes and authoritarian fanboys. Yes. But the thing to me is that, like, when you say democracy, there's not a sense of like desire and electricity. And it's because of this quote from FDR. It's that democracy does not seem, in their lived experience, their visceral bodily experience, as the thing that has helped them with the problems and the discontent that has plagued them and their communities for decades. Unemployment, insecurity, children hungry, government confusion, government weakness, lack of leadership. So my argument there was that if you're going to get people back on board with democracy, if you're going to stand up to what we're seeing with Trump, you have to have a story that will actually address everything I just outlined from FDR. You have to have a plan. You have to have a message. You have to have a narrative. And I think that, critics and skeptics aside, I think that is what Mamdani has done in New York. I think he has given people a story to believe in and a message that's like, I'm here to be responsive to your discontent and insecurity, rather than responsible to corporations, big donors, affluent people, or anyone else. Okay. Now, here's what I want to expand on, Dan, and here's what I want to get your thoughts on. Is I think for a long time, anybody who is on what we can broadly call the American left, and that is Hillary Clinton liberals, that is Bernie Sanders progressives, everybody to the left and to the right of both of them, is there's been a message that goes like this. It is really hard to talk about what it means to be a good American. And by extension, it's really hard to talk about what it would mean to be somebody living a good life, a meaningful life, a virtuous life, a dutiful life, a life that is filled with meaning and duty and virtue and good and right. I think we all have our own stories of that. And some of you are getting skittish. I know some of you are listening in on this and are like, not sure where this plane's going, but I hope this is not the day that Brad is the person I have to cancel. Give me 1 or 2 more minutes here. Go ahead, Dan. Dan.
I'm just laughing. I'm not going to cancel you. It's all right.
You might.
You're no
You
danger
might.
for me.
So we on the American left are very skittish about telling anybody else what it would mean to live a good life. And especially ex-evangelicals like you and me are really worried about it, because we're like, I've been down that road. Somebody told me what a good life was, and a virtuous life and a dutiful life. And I gave a lot to that church or that community or that something. And I'm not doing that again. I get it. Here's the problem. And this is what I think has become very clear to me as I've written the book that I'm writing right now and trying to finish, is there are a lot of people out there who will tell you what a good life is, what a virtuous life is, what a meaningful life is. They will also tell you what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, a good woman, a bad woman, a good man, a hard man, a righteous man, a something man. And they're all the worst people. So I think the problem we're in is twofold. You ready? And I'll shut up. Is I think that democracy has become an empty signifier because so many people feel like it is not the answer to ordinary Americans' aspirations and discontent, to insecurity, unemployment, income inequality, the lack of the American dream, whatever you want to talk about. Police brutality, systemic racism, corporations taking advantage of us, oligarchs taking advantage of us, a completely unfair civic square and completely unfair economy, not being able to just make it as normal people, not having the protections we need. Democracy has never worked for people in their body, in their experience. They're like, it's not the thing that worked for me once and I want to get back because it's never seemingly worked for me. And when I say democracy, I don't mean like the idea of democracy. I mean the actual, like, hey, I voted for someone and I did a thing, or I tried to do what I was supposed to and it didn't actually make a difference. And then in addition to that, Dan, I think that one of the reasons that it's hard to get people back on that train and back on that track is because the message you get from Democrats is often one that's like, if you vote for us, we will leave you alone so you can go decide what a good and meaningful life is. So Kamala Harris is talking about running for 2028. And to me, there's like this big pit in my stomach of like, if you run another campaign that is like, if you vote for me and Tim Walz, You can be you, and we won't get in the way. You can be gay. You can have a mixed race marriage. You can be not religious. You can be you. And we won't try to hurt you like Donald Trump is. And don't get me wrong, Donald Trump's trying to hurt a lot of people right now. They're not saying, here's a story of what it means to be a good American. Here's a story that we could tell as Americans to be proud of. We can be a generation of people, a group of people who live this way, which is a virtuous way to live. That could be focused on AI. I've talked about on this pod before. AI, climate crisis, income inequality, unemployment, oligarchs, 1%, all of it. And so I want you to join us in a movement. So instead of inviting you to a story that says, vote for us and you can all live your own story, we have to invite people to a movement where they are able to think about their lives as having meaning and purpose and virtue. And the danger of that, I'm very aware of. It can be oppressive. It can be exclusionary. It can be a narrative that leaves certain people out, and that's a problem. And I want to avoid that. But the problem we have right now is there are people out there who are willing to tell you what it means to be a good person, and their names are Jordan Peterson and Doug Wilson and Ben Shapiro and Pete Hegseth and Peter Thiel and Allie Beth Stuckey and the Kirk family. They will all tell you what it means to live a good, meaningful life. And a lot of people are like, sign me up, because I need that. Because this world is confusing and shitty, and I don't know what else to do, and I'm looking for something. So help me out, Andrew Tate. Help me out, Candace Owens. I'm here for it. And if no one else is going to do it, then I will try. And these are, to me, the like some of the systemic problems here. And I want to link this in a minute to youth soccer. And you're like, God, Brad, just get a life. But I'll shut up. What do you think about that whole idea?
There's a lot there, Brad. There's a lot there. Like, so I've got a few thoughts, and I'm going to put my kind of wonky, I've written 2 books about democratic political theory.
Nerd out, dude. Nerd out.
Put my wonky, Democrat hat on. So when people to your point about democracy being an empty signifier, that's a real thing. You can read a whole bunch of books about democratic political theory. I get a bunch of different definitions. If anybody bothers to define it, of what the hell democracy is and what that names. Is it like the thing that they did in ancient Greece? Is it just majority rule? Is it just having particular institutions and structures and so forth? Is it parliamentary democracy or constitutional democracy? And all these kind of things. And so a lot of theorists and people who study democracy will make a distinction between, on one hand, substantive definitions of democracy, right? Democracy as, something really meaningful and substantive. And this is what this is. And that's where I live. Like in queer democracy, that's what I put forward as a substantive definition of democracy. You get others that are more of like it's just kind of a formal category. And so it's often taken for granted that if you have things like a legislative branch and an executive branch and popular elections and, free and fair elections, et cetera, you are by default a democracy. And so that's one of the places where you get a lot of this tension, because there are plenty of democratic theorists who would look at something like the US and be like, in any substantive sense, we haven't been really democratic in a long time, right? When you start having, unfettered campaign donations, right? That can come in, when you start defending money as speech, when you make it so that politicians are all beholden to corporations and special interests and all that kind of stuff, when you essentially make it so that you can have a kind of the rule of money or the rule of some oligarchs or whatever within a supposedly democratic system, that's not meaningfully democratic. Or when you're going to talk about, the word democracy means the rule or power of the people, right? The demos and kratos, those are the 2 Greek words. When the so-called will of the people is like this, this Olympic event that happens every 4 years, and everybody gets up and they like poke a hole in a piece of paper or they fill in a dot or whatever. And that's their civic participation, right? Plenty of people would say, is that what we mean by democracy? Is that what we mean by the rule of the people? That you just stand up and do that every now and then? And then you could get into more concrete things like, opinion polls of Congress are always low, really bad, like, sort of approval ratings. But the incumbency rate in Congress is sky high. It means that people bitch about people in Congress all the time, and then they just vote for the same people over and over and over again, right? So it unfolds into all kinds of questions about that. And I think that's one piece of this is, if we talk about democracy, what do we mean? To tie it in with what you're saying, I think a lot of people on the left who want to affirm something democratic have been afraid to put forward a substantive conception of democracy. This is what it really means. If we're going to talk about the people, who or what is that, and how do we fit into that, and what does it mean to have the people rule, and who draws those boundaries, and all of those kinds of things. And I think people on the right who until fairly recently, and they all wanted to claim the mantle of democracy, right? That's one of the things about an empty signifier like that. Everybody can use the same word, and they just kind of fill it in different ways. And so you can have two people both proclaiming themselves to be democratic, small d, democratic, fans of democracy, with radically different conceptions of what that is. And that just kind of goes unnoticed. Recently, we've had more people on the right just being very explicit that, like, no, we're not talking about democracy anymore. But if you talk about who is the people for them, they can tell you who the people is. And of course, that's how I always approach this, right? They'll tell you who the people are and who they aren't. And that's where you're going to get the story of who the real men and women are, and what gender is this, and what sexuality is that, who has a place among the democratic people. And I think people on the left, for lots of good reasons, like you say, have been really nervous about giving normative answers like that, right? The position on the left has often been, we're not going to define those things. And I agree with that. But what I think people miss is that there's a deep affirmation in that, right? That's not just about, we're not going to define things. That is implicitly a story about who or what the people is. And by the way, you get in these weird like nomenclature things, like the Greek word for people, you could singular. So we say people is, and that sounds weird in English, but talking about the people as a unity, right?
Yeah.
People on the left have not been good, I think, at casting a positive vision of what the people is, and how that ties into things like, unemployment, and how that ties into things like income inequality, and how that ties into things like defending rights and so forth. An inclusive conception of the people, I think, is what drives a lot of things on the left, a lot of groups on the left. The irony is, and this is where the bad storytelling comes in, the way that it's often articulated when you rattle off a whole list of different groups, it comes across as divisive rather than unitive. And I think that that's part of the issue of like not having a story. And I see people in the chat saying, right, like, people don't want politicians to tell them how to have a virtuous life and so forth. I want to try to highlight here. I agree with that in some ways, but number one, I think people say that. I don't think a lot of people believe that. Millions and millions and millions of people do actually want somebody to cast a vision for them of what a virtuous life is, or we wouldn't be in the circumstances that we're in, where half of Americans voted for Donald Trump. Half didn't, but half did, right? Of the people who voted, or just shy of that. But I think that the trick is, you can affirm all of those things and say, we're going to affirm you as who you are, and absolutely affirm your full becoming and flourishing, and creating a society where everybody flourishes and everybody benefits and everybody has a place, and we're richer for that, and whatever. I think that can be cast as a positive virtue. And I think that you're right, that people on the left have been reluctant to do that and haven't done that. And I think that that's a piece of what this is. And I think that also ties into, like, questions, big questions about, how loaded is the word democracy, right? When people, I think that when people hear, the average person hears the word democracy, they think what comes to mind is all the democratic structures and institutions and the mechanisms of this constitutional democratic republic kind of thing that we have. And yeah, they know that if you have lots and lots of money, you get the ear of the politicians. They know that it feels oftentimes, certainly at like the national level, as if your vote doesn't matter. They know that we live in a system. There's a theorist that people don't know named Sheldon Wolin, who passed away a few years ago, but writes on democracy. And I think his stuff is just really powerful. And I'm channeling a lot of what he says in a book called Democracy Inc. So I just invite people, if you're interested, to go like pick that up and give it a read, because he really walks through all the ways in which what we call American democracy has, in some ways from its origin, but certainly in recent years, worked to exclude the people from any kind of governance, right? So that we all feel very content voting once every 4 years. Like we feel like that's what democracy is. We go out and we do that. And by deadening a deeper sense of democracy, when people hear the word democracy, we need to stand up for democracy. They're like, what, that like janky, like, outdated thing that we do where like I got up and I voted 4 years ago and, it didn't seem to do much, or it didn't work for me, or this dude promised he would do all this stuff and didn't do it and whatever, versus a more substantive notion of the participation of the people in governing their lives, in making their demands and letting their voices be heard. And the question, a broader question is, if somebody says, well, like that doesn't sound like what people mean by democracy, then cool, let's call it something else. Like, let's aim for democracy. We have a substantive definition of what the power of the people is. And that word is too loaded or too co-opted by these other kinds of things, then we can call it something else. But let's call it something and let's put it forward. And let's, as you say, I think that a lot of people on the left are kind of skittish about being normative. They're skittish about saying how people ought to be. They're skittish about saying that something is bad. The most negatively responded to episode of It's in the Code that I ever did is the one where I said that like you need to entertain the possibility that maybe some of those people in your life aren't good people, right? It was there are a lot of good people who whatever, and man, people got really upset with me. And the reason is, that you guys talk about not judging people all the time, and yeah, there you are judging people, and I was like, I hear that, but there are people in the world I don't think are really good people. There are people in the world that I tell my kids they shouldn't be like. And I think that being willing to wade in and actually say, like, there's a good way to be and there's a bad way to be. And I don't mean that in some deep metaphysical sense, but that I think all of that's what you're talking about. Being able to tell that story and motivate people and get them to stand up is something that the left has just not been great at.
So let me put it this way. Let's go to the 22-year-old cis dude. And this is again, this is a hard episode for me to do, Dan, because I feel like people are gonna be like kind of shocked at like what I'm saying, and I hope people don't feel like I'm betraying a lot of the things that I've been talking on this show for 1,000 episodes, but this is not me being like, what would really save this country is if we just listen to straight white men again. This is not what I'm doing. That's that's why I'm having a minute right here of like, I want to say this the right way. If you are a 21-year-old straight dude at the moment, the only person telling you about what it means to be a man is Andrew Tate, Ben Shapiro, the Manosphere, Logan Paul, Jake Paul, those guys, right? Like the only one who's like, hey, here's what it means to be masculine are those guys. And they're telling you a story about your life and about this country and about this moment in time and about your civilization and the West and all that stuff. That is what, if you're not into the Manosphere, then maybe you're into Curtis Yarvin and then dissident right, the tech right. Maybe you're one of those guys. But there are places you can learn about what it means to be a good man, a virtuous man. Maybe you're not listening to any of those, but you are listening to Doug Wilson and Pete Hegseth and Stephen Wolf and Andrew Isker and CJ Engel and on down the line. All of those voices coming from different perspectives are going to tell you what it means to be a good man, to live a righteous life, to tell a story of yourself that you can be proud of when you die. Here's what you can pass on to your kids. Okay. And they're the worst people. I have been writing a book about them for a year. I have read all of their books and listened to all their podcasts, and getting up in the morning is sometimes hard because I know I have to go do that again. I'm like, I really would like this. I'd really like this book to be written. So I don't have to, I'm going to go read a lot of books about orchids, flowers, painting. I just give me all the beauty and the love. I'm going to watch Bob's Burgers just for 3 days. It's going to be great when this book's over. Dan, if we're not going to show up, if no one's going to show up and tell the 21-year-old dude, here's what it means to be a man, and not the toxic version, not the patriarchal, gross version, but some story of that, And then I'm going to extend it out. And I totally get, Marty had the comment that you already referenced. Marty's like, I'm not sure people want politicians telling them what it means to be a good American. And I hear you, totally hear you. I'm not trying to bring some oppressive story. I don't want to be Tony Robbins or some inspirational speaker. I'm not up here to club you with like my vision of America. Yeah, get on board. But the other side is out there telling people every day what it means to be a good American and how they can save this country from those people who hate it. And they're like telling them not just what they need to do to win, but they're telling them why they should win. Like what makes them good people, virtuous people, dutiful people. Like you have to fill in the content of people's lives with meaning and purpose and something they can feel like is their legacy and their duty and their love. And it's really hard because now, again, some of you are listening and are like, I'm getting kind of skittish, Brad, because it sounds like you're going to tell me what I have to love and what I have to do to be a good person. And I'm not trying to like impose that on people. What I'm trying to say is like, if you don't have a story to step into to fill that vacuum, the worst people will fill it and they will keep winning. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But like, here's FDR, 1944. And I've mentioned this on the pod before. I'll mention it one more time. I'll throw it back to you. 1944, he's like, you know what? I mean, this is bold, Dan. He's like, you know what? The rights that we have in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, not enough. Quote, inadequate to assure us equality. So here's a politician who's like, you know what? Constitution, Bill of Rights, not enough. We need more. We need a second American founding in some sense. We need to like get revolutionary. So I'm going to give you the Bill of Rights, the second Bill of Rights. And that is going to guarantee you employment, adequate income for food, shelter, and recreation. Farmers' rights, the fair income, make Argentina great again. I don't think so. Freedom from unfair competition. Have you seen the stats about how much like 50 families in this country own? We live, I mean, you could argue, Dan, that you said earlier, we're not in a democracy. You could argue we're not in capitalism. We're just in tech feudalism at this point. It also guarantees you decent housing, adequate medical care, Social Security, and education. And I think you could add on to that in 2025, protections against AI and building a future. And if you don't want to say green, hear me out and I'll be quiet. You don't want to say Green New Deal. You don't want to say climate crisis. Fine. Here's what I'm going to show up and say. The government's going to work really hard to make sure all those floods don't keep happening. And all those fires. And all that lack of water. And all those hurricanes that are supposed to be once in a century or once in a millennium that keep happening. Those two. We're just going to like work really hard to like all this weird weather that we're happening. We're going to create a future where we can adapt to it and live. And not every 3 months worry that we're going to have a natural disaster. Are y'all with that? Green New Deal? Nah, I don't even know what that is. Get out of here. Climate crisis, if you want, sure. I'm just talking about the fact that your valley flooded in Texas and girls died at a camp. I'm talking about the fact that half of LA burned. I'm just talking about the fact that like people don't have water in certain places. I'm talking about the fact that Jamaica and Cuba are under threat right now from a category 5 hurricane, and it's going to head up this way soon. Like we can fill in the vacuum of like, if you are for this Bill of Rights, you're a good American. And if you're not, I think you're not. Judgment made. I think you're a bad person and a bad American and you don't care about this country. How's that? I think you're not with us as Americans if you don't think that people have the right to work, the right to housing, the right to medical care, the right to Social Security, and the right to education. I think you hate America if you hate those things. So come get me. Tell me I'm too judgmental. Tell me, right? But I'm going to tell you, you need to change if you want to be part of this community and a good American. Am I right? I don't know, Dan. Is this message going to sell? Is anyone going to elect me? I don't think so. I'm just saying, if we don't have anything to say about living a good, virtuous, and meaningful life and what it means to be a good citizen, all the worst people will, and they'll keep winning. I don't know. we can wrap this up. What do you think?
So as you're sitting here talking about this, I'm walking on the same thin ice you are because I'm about to say things I've been thinking about for 30 seconds. But that's how we get in trouble. But I think there was a book that came out years ago. It's when I was in grad school, called Talking Right, and it was this kind of analysis of rhetoric on the right and how the right was just better at rhetorical games than the left was. And you just think of things like, remember death panels, right? When they were opposed
Yep.
to Obamacare, and they had the whole death panels thing, and all of that kind of stuff. And and you're just like, yeah, they're better at it. They've been better at that, and people opposed them have been, I think, afraid of just playing that rhetorical game and always qualifying everything and worrying about it, whatever. And there comes a time where you just have to get better at the rhetorical game. And so as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, like, if you read things about masculinity on the right, or Christian conceptions or evangelical conceptions of masculinity, you'll come up with a list of virtues. And like a couple that come up all the time are protection and provision, right? That if you're a man, you protect. If you're a man, you provide. It's like, yes, what happens if we pick up those same terms and we are the ones to lean it in, right? So protecting, fine. But we're protecting, men are being told to protect the wrong people. They're being told that the wrong people are in danger. They're taking that calling, if it was one, if we wanted to use that language, to protect. And what happens if we tell the story of being a man, protecting others is protecting the vulnerable and the weak, rather than jumping on board with the bullies who do nothing but target the vulnerable and the weak, right? That's a message a lot of people heard growing up from like their parents, right? That just don't ever be the bully. Stand up to the bully. Be the kid that helps the little kid on the playground that other people pick on or whatever. The point is there are resources to tap there to touch that sense of calling or purpose or meaning, right? The same thing with provision, right? Providing what and for whom, right? Providing for those who can't provide for themselves, providing for those who, have been hurt by the economy, for providing for those are all the kind of messages that we can tell. And those are the messages the right say that they have, right? They always say they want to help the economy. They're the ones that created this monstrosity of an economy that we have, right? They're the ones who did this, telling that story, couching that. I think your language of, who is it that quote unquote hates America? Well, I don't know. Which group hates the most Americans? How many Americans do you hate if you don't accept any of the queer people or the people of color or women who get out of line or people who voted all of those kinds of things. So I think that there's real room here. And I'm looking down, we have other like American kind of slogans or things that are there. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Why can't the left talk about people who can't pursue happiness? Why can't that be cast as a vision that the Elon Musks of the world and so forth, they don't give a shit about your happiness, right? That's not what they're after. Um, and so I think that I think there are resources there. The pieces are there to do this. It's the will to do it and to talk in a new way and to have to play a game that, very frankly, I think a lot of people on the left feel kind of dirty playing, right? Doing the rhetoric and buying into that and so forth. But I think it's a price that has to be paid of learning how to talk that way, learning how to cast that vision. Just real quick, like I'm watching the chat as we talk.
Yeah, I was going to say we should go to the chat because there's a lot
Well,
of great stuff.
there's a
So
lot
you go
of good
first. But
discussion
yeah,
about identity
yeah,
politics and identity and class. And I
yeah.
guess, one of the things I would say is, I haven't read everything there, but number one, class is a form of identity, right? I think the dichotomy between identity politics and class is like a false dichotomy. It's one that people on the left have liked, comes out of a certain kind of Marxist or socialist background, but it's not one that I think fits, right? So I think that class is a form of identity. I also think politics is always about identity. Politics is about the allocation of social resources. That's what politics is about. Whether you're talking about concrete resources, right, the redistribution of wealth through taxes, or handing out government subsidies for different kinds of things, or whether you're talking about less tangible things like rights or access to legal avenues to different things or infrastructure or whatever, right? It's about the allocation of resources, and allocation of resources is always about identifying who gets those resources and who doesn't and based on what. So identity is fundamental to politics. And so in my mind, when people contrast quote unquote identity politics with something else, they are only masquerading. They're hiding some form of identity that is privileged under non-identity. It's always about identity. And I think that that's another piece of the discourse that has to be done is to call out the people who will simply appeal to, Americans want. No, you're not talking about Americans. You're talking about some particular subset. Like, who are the people that you're saying should have those resources? How are you going to allocate those social resources? I think that can become part of the story as well. So we have all these, things that political theorists and others talk about and debate about, like, class and economics and identity politics. I think they have to be given sort of legs on the ground and narrated, right? They have to be implotted, put into a plot where people can see themselves and feel themselves. And I think, to your point, the left has to be better at doing that.
So here's a question that, like, and this is going to some of the stuff that I'm seeing in the chat. And I want to respond to a couple of those things, but here's a question that I see all the time across the worst people I read books from for my book. So I read Christian nationalists, I read Doug Wilson, I read Rushdoony, I read all of their spiritual progeny, I read all the rad trad Catholics, the tech feudalists, the monarchs. And the question they all ask, Dan, is what would you die for? What would you die for? And like all of those gross DHS social media posts of like homeland, heritage, protect it, they're awful. But what they're saying is like, what would you die to create or protect or build, right? And I think that one of the things that the left never will get down to is like, what are you so passionate about? What do you believe in so much that you'd be willing to die for it? That's a hard question. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's one I want to figure out today. But that is the stakes that people on one side of the spectrum are buying into. And a lot of people are being seduced into. Okay. And so again, like there's somebody in the chat right now saying the right knows how to appeal to the lost and confused by telling them what to be. Totally. That is how cults work. That's what the person in the chat's saying. I think there's a lot of people who are not lost and confused that are like, what is my life for? What is the purpose of being alive? What is the purpose of a human community? What is it I'm going to hand out, pass on to my kids, right? And I think one of the things that folks are pointing out in the chat is that the right is better at this because they're homogeneous and they're willing to lie. Agree. I've said it for a long time. One of the virtues on the right is conformity. And one of the things that we've seen forever, and we see it now all the time from Mike Johnson, from Donald Trump, from Stephen Miller, is lying. Outright, blatant lying. Oh, the Democrats won't open the government back up because they want to give undocumented people health care, right? I mean, it's just, right? And the lying, okay, is all there. And Michael says, yes, and they have so much money, right? So many billionaires, so much organization, all of that. Yes. And I guess I just start to wonder, like, here's what I'm at today, and what I'm trying to like convey to everybody and convey to you, Dan, is like, the last year of writing this book has led me to this place where, like, if you're not gonna articulate a vision of what it means to be a good American and a good human being in some sense, there's a lot of people who will. And I think they're gonna keep winning. Because going back to my original thesis, democracy feels like an empty signifier for a lot of people. They don't know what they're saving and they don't know why. I likened it previously to like a relationship that's lost its like sizzle. You still love the person, but you're just not sure that you're in love with them anymore. Y'all know the difference? Like, hey, I I love you, but I don't think we're in love anymore. I think people like feel that about democracy. When you say, hey, democracy is awesome, they're like, yeah, I love democracy, but am I in love with it? Does it make me like get goosebumps and excited? Would I die for it? That's the difference. You know what I mean? And I'll just go back to this cis male manosphere 21-year-old dude example. like, I don't think there's any, and I'm sure people are going to put, as soon as I say this, people are going to put stuff in the chat and be like, well, you don't know about this. And you guys are right. You all are right. So I already know I'm wrong. So, but I'll just say it anyway. When it comes to like masculinity, the only time I think the left really mentions masculinity is to say it's toxic. And when it comes to masculinity, the right every day, all day is like, men are awesome and you should be this kind of man. And this is what it means if you're a good kind of dude. And that's what I mean is like, we need outlines of what it would mean to be a good cis straight dude who is a protector without being a dominator, without being an exploiter, without being an abuser, and without that protection being paternalistic or controlling or dominating. Right? We need to talk about like ways that people might like be manifest and embodied in the world, that are inclusive and promote flourishing, but give them a sense of like a story of who they are. And that's what I'm just feeling right now at the end of writing this book is like one side is doing that all day, every day. And most folks on the other side are not. And the Kamala Harris 2028 to me is just more of like, there's an empty center. You're allowed to fill it in however you want. It's a choose your own adventure. Vote for me and choose your own adventure. And everyone's like, I've been trying to choose my adventure. And this is hard. The minimum wage hasn't been raised in how long? The government doesn't work for me. Nobody listens to what I really need. Nobody's helping my family, my situation, my people. I've been trying to choose my own adventure, and every time I do, I end up like snuffed out or in a dead end. And so I don't think Kamala 2028 is the thing because there's an empty center there. So we all have some great, well, I mean, Emily says, go talk to Kamala. I could, I don't know. I mean, what do you want me to say to Kamala? I don't think Kamala wants to hear what I just said. And I called her earlier. She did not answer. So I had to call Dan and do this episode. It was kind of disappointing, but here I am, Dan. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Unlike your sloppy seconds option. So
yeah, I'm sorry for that. I did call Kamala Harris. She did not answer. Okay.
Yeah.
And there it is. So Dawson said there's the Good Men Project. That's great. And that's the good stuff. I have dug into that a little bit. And so anyway, Dan, you want to do any final thoughts, or I feel like we've answered a bunch of questions in the chat, and a lot of the chat today is basically on what we're saying in real time. There's not a lot of questions coming from other episodes or other like topics that we've raised on the show. So we'll give people a chance if they want to put in.
I was gonna say now everybody will start putting those in and be like, oh
yeah,
wait, I needed to complain, but it's in the code, or
Yeah,
whatever.
if no,
bring it.
Put it in, folks, if you want to do that. Yeah, go for it. But
just
anyway,
a couple thoughts on this, and this is one that sounds weird. Is I think there's a need to be more judgmental, right? I mean, I think there's this sense of like people on the left for a long time have always wanted to be like, we're inclusive, we include everybody, we value everybody. We don't value everybody, and we shouldn't value everybody. Sorry, like if you're an inclusive person, wants to have an inclusive society, the one thing you can't make space for are people who are like radically exclusive and and bigots and Nazis and like whatever. Like, okay, cool. Like there's not space for that. And yeah, I'm going to judge that. I'm going to call it, I'm going to call it what it is. I'm not going to affirm it. So another theorist that I have real issues with in some ways, but and people who know it will be like, oh yeah. Slavoj Žižek, who once talked about, the left is too into love and we need to be more into hate. And you're like, oh my God, Slavoj, what do you mean by that? He's like, we hate Nazis. You're like, okay. But he's got a point, right? Like, let's call it what it is. And, not, and if it doesn't, it gets spun around. It's what happens when you walk yourself. Maybe you've never had this happen, but you walk yourself into a corner with like a debate with somebody or, Uncle Ron at Thanksgiving dinner or whatever. And you talk about being more inclusive. It's like, oh, being more inclusive, huh? It doesn't feel real inclusive right now. I don't feel like you're including me. I don't feel like, and all of a sudden you're like, God. So like change the language, be aware of the boundaries that are there and that they need to be there, right? It's the same way that people on the right co-opted the language of colorblindness, right? Remember colorblind? Supposed to be colorblind, not be racist and whatever, and it meant well. And then the right picked it up, said, oh, if you're supposed to be colorblind, then, it's just, you're the ones making things about race. You're the ones who were talking about how should we pay attention to what race somebody is and try to make society more equitable. And we've seen where that got us. Like literally that language got us here. When John Roberts first said it at the Supreme Court and said, if you want to make America not racist, you should stop focusing on race and so forth. That language that's afraid to draw boundaries, that's afraid to make judgments, that's afraid to state limits of inclusion. I think that all of that is part of this and part of that story, together with words that I think we have allowed to be co-opted by others, right? And I know there are probably people listening to this who the very language of masculinity will make them nervous, because it has for many people been so equated with what I would call toxic masculinity that there's no conception of a different model of that, right? No other way of being that. We got to get over our own discomfort there and back to a space where we can talk about things like that, because we can do what I think lots of academics do, right? I don't know about everybody on the left, but lots of academics are really good about sitting around and postulating what people want and postulating what human nature is like, and not paying enough attention to like what people in the world are actually doing and saying and so forth. And I think we're seeing what that is, and we have to find a way to help fill that vacuum or compete in that space and stop just ceding it to people on the right, because we've seen where that gets us.
I really like a comment here from Theo that says, what I really didn't like about Kamala's platform is that it was all about tiny tweaks, not transformative changes. Tax credit for first-time homebuyers, rather than efforts to make sure the homes are actually built. And I think that's part of what I'm talking about here. And I think that's part about what's coming out of the Roosevelt Institute, is the sense that instead of showing up and saying, hey, first-time homebuyers, tax credit, I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but the amount of voters who actually knew the ins and outs of that policy proposal and like what that was going to mean and how it would work for them, small, very small amount of people were like, well, Donald Trump's promising to make America great again, but first-time tax credit, huh? And all of that was drowned out anyway by all of the talk about capital gains and all these other things that were picked up on the right and spread about Kamala Harris. And I think Theo has a really good point here of saying, if you tell the story differently, people actually listen. Instead of showing up and saying, hey, first-time tax credit, you show up and say, this country has a housing shortage. Who here can't afford housing? Who here has rent that is sky high? Who sound like Dr. Seuss at this point. Okay. Who here has tried to buy a home and just been completely priced out and has accepted the fact that that's not available to them? Well, that's not the America that we're going to allow for. So we're going to build this many homes, right? Like we're going to build this many homes if I'm president. Okay. And like, there's just a lot of like, I think storytelling that has to be done, and it has to go like a lot further. So that's one. Number two is there's a lot of talk in the chat about the American flag. Michael's point about the flag, and Michael has been talking about this in the chat about like how the American flag is what we should take to the protest, not the sign, etc. And one of the things that I think has been powerful about No Kings has been the people dressing up like in, various like colonial, pre-colonial dress, whatever, people who are participating in the Tea Party, protesting King George, that kind of stuff. Because it's taking back the American flag, it's taking back the American past and saying, oh, we do have a history of this. We have a history of fighting kings in this country, of monarchs, of people who want to tax us but not represent us. People who, I don't know, like what Brad says all the time, want to rule us but not govern. That's the most American thing I can think of. Most American thing I can think of is saying, you don't get to rule us, especially if you don't represent us. Right? And so I think there's something there. So anyway, we got to go. Any other final things here, Dan, before we run? Anything else in the chat you want to get to? Do you want me to tell you about youth soccer? I'm happy to do that. I'm sure that's the rant nobody wants, but I'm happy to do it.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm always eager to hear your rants, especially if it's about youth soccer. All those youth soccer rants that you and I have, talked about over the years. I will say this, and again, I think there's value to reclaiming those symbols, right? Again, I think a lot of this, maybe for me, it comes down to people on the left sort of ceding too much ground for too long, right? oh, people on the right, have their flag pins all the time or drive their trucks with the flags or, whatever. So we're just going to stay away from the flag versus showing up with the flag and being like, hey, guess what? It's my flag too. I can pick it up and I can redefine it and I can, do that. I find it ironic. I live in Massachusetts, obviously, and Boston is one of the cities that Trump, doesn't like and argues against and threatens and so forth. And like, you can go there and like, you can see where they put the T in the harbor. You can go do all of those things that like, those are powerful symbols that can be reclaimed. And I think that there's value to that. I think there's just a sense of needing to like quit ceding ground all the time to those on the right. And like, there's kind of nothing left, right? Versus being more, frankly, adversarial in the right ways, right? I'm not talking about storming capitals. I'm not talking about threatening people at polling places, right? I'm talking about things like no kings and thousands and thousands and thousands of people out doing these things and so on. I just think there's value to reclaiming those symbols. And I think I guess the final thing I think is that oftentimes I think those on the left undervalue the power of symbols. The power, we talk about emotion all the time, right? The power of emotion and how that motivates. It just hasn't been a strength. Certainly in my lifetime of the American left to be able to tap into those things. And I think it's like an underdeveloped muscle that we need to start putting some effort into to really try to build up.
But if you're not going to cede ground, you have to have a place that you have to have a way to
Yeah.
stand and move forward.
Yep.
That's my point. Is you have to tell people what we're doing to march forward. It can't be an open like, oh, like we're trying not to cede ground so that everyone can just have this open center that they can fill in all the time. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to take away personal liberties or free expression or individualism. That's not it. So, all right, here's my 2-minute rant on youth sports, and then we're out of here. So, like, I don't know, Dan, you and I have talked about this. Like, I played a lot of youth sports growing up. Like, I really like team sports. I'm really bad at individual sports because like my brain won't allow it. Because like if I play an individual sport, golf or tennis, there's no one like to get mad at other than me, and then I just spiral into this interior like destruction of myself of like what is every time you miss hit a tennis ball or you don't like putt well, I just go into spiral, right?
I'm
Bowling.
just gonna say real quick that I now want nothing more than to go mini golfing with you. Like I
No,
think
you
that
don't.
I do. I think everybody can put it in the chat. This is gonna be the new thing. We're gonna like live stream like putt putt with Brad Onishi.
Because
Sorry, I didn't mean to
it's
sidetrack you.
but it really does. Like my partner, her whole thing is like, I hate team sports. I just want to like be on my own and play the sport. Like, just let me go on a run or let me like, do the thing individually. And I can't do it. Right. So I grew up playing baseball, soccer, basketball. Those are the things I liked. And I really enjoyed being on a team. I liked working together. I liked accomplishing things together, the whole thing. And now as I get kids and I talk to friends and everyone, like, youth sports is out of control. Youth sports has lost its mind. It has. No, and like, hear me out. Katie, yes. John McEnroe levels of rage. Yes, absolutely. Like towards myself, maybe towards the referee and
No,
myself.
I just want to say none of this is making me less likely to want to do this.
It's a whole part of me that I've tried to hide, I've tried to put that into witness protection program. I don't want to go back to the John McEnroe version of me. So youth sports is out of control. Like, I talked to somebody and they may be listening. I don't know. I'm not going to say names, but like they were telling me about this like 12-year-old soccer game, girls. And it was not one of these, like, these girls are on the teams. It's just sort of like kids who are on the like third best club team in their region. They're 12 playing soccer on a Saturday. And like the other parents were going behind the goal and yelling at the goalie all game to like do better. Like Happy Gilmore yelling at the putter, like, don't you, like at the ball, like, don't you want to go to your home? So Dan, I can tell you that if I am ever at a soccer game where my daughter is 12 years old and someone is behind the goal yelling at her to be a better goalie, I will go to jail that day. There will be no more podcast. I will lose my career because you're not going to go around a goal and 4 feet from behind my 12-year-old daughter, yell at her to like be a better goalie. I will go to jail that day. I'll stop the game.
My 12-year-old son plays keeper, so I feel it, right?
It's not
Yeah,
happening.
that's not
I'm telling
happening.
you
Yeah.
right now, that is not happening. Like, here's my point though, is there's whole Instagram genres of like parents losing it at youth sports, people just cussing out umpires walking off the field because they don't want to listen to the parents anymore, parents tackling other coaches, parents tackling other kids. And there's a whole discussion, and y'all are going to put this in the chat, all the economics of youth sports, all the ways that like kids have to excel just to get a spot in college or whatever. There's all of that to be said. I think there's also this sense of like people don't have other things in their life where they win or lose and they fight for something. And so when they go to the 12-year-old soccer game or like the 9-year-old baseball game or the 13-year-old football game, that is the one time in the week they are like, I have a team. We're going to win. We're not taking shit from anybody. And I will die for this, meaning I will attack that umpire. I will wrestle another parent. I will go yell at a 12-year-old who's trying to play goalie. Because I don't have a church. I don't have a synagogue. I don't have a group. I don't have a civic organization. I don't have an ethnic community. I don't have an Italian American club or a Chinese neighborhood. I don't have other groups. I have no other groups. I have no other places where I win or lose. I have no other places where it matters. So on Sundays, when the 9-year-olds play softball, it's like I'm going to battle as a parent. And I think it's all part of like the disaffiliation of Americans from institutions, bowling alone, the whole thing. I also think it's part of this, like, where else do you fight your battles if you're a suburban American? Where else can you feel like you're good or bad, a winner, a loser? And some of it, unfortunately, is channeled into like 9-year-old softball and 12-year-old football and 13-year-old soccer. What do you think? Some people are afraid of that I'm going to go to jail someday in the chat now, and it may be true. And if you hear Dan asking for bail money, it's because somebody was yelling at my 12-year-old daughter to be a better goalkeeper, and I will be in jail. That's what will happen that day. I will be in jail. Go ahead, Dan.
There are worse reasons to go to jail. Right? You know?
Mister, I got arrested at a football game with a chain wallet.
That's
Go
true.
ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. I didn't do anything to that van. Like I didn't. If anybody wants, you can go.
I want to get the police
dig up-
chief on this show to give his side of the story, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm all right. Anyway. Yeah. I mean, it's, the whole youth sports thing is it's a thing. And I'm aware of it when I go to stuff because I'm like, I never want to be one of those parents who's like, I don't know, yelling at other parents or yelling at the coach or yelling at the officials or whatever. When I was maybe 15, the town I grew up in, you could be a ref of like kind of lower age, like youth soccer.
I did that.
Yeah. And I remember like this one time the game stopped for 10 minutes as this parent out in the middle of the field was just screaming at me. It was in my face, screaming at me. And in retrospect now, as a middle-aged person, like why the hell did no other parents like come tell this guy to like stop or whatever? But I think it's a thing, but what it touches on, right, is the deep affective emotional needs that are not being met or have no, let's call it, appropriate route of expression for lots and lots of people, right? It's the kind of thing that, you know, if you had a video of that, I'm sure that most of those people, if somebody had a video of them and played it 3 days later, said, hey, by the way, this is you in front of your kids, this is what you did, they'd be embarrassed about that. They might not admit they're embarrassed. Maybe they'll just get defensive or they'll start yelling at the person who did, you know, whatever. But I mean, they would be embarrassed.
Yep.
And I think it touches to a real thing, right? And again, it's that affective, emotional dimension that there is a lot of energy and a lot of affect and a lot of emotion out there, and it will find expression.
Yeah.
Somewhere. To circle it back around to what we've been talking about, can those on the left get people to care that much about the stuff that really matters?
Mm-hmm. And
right. What if some of these people got as worked up about, I don't know, targeting communities by taking away their health care as they get about, I don't know, whether the 12-year-old should have stopped that ball or not? Like, imagine if you could bottle up that and put it to something that really matters I think it shows the kind of misaligned values that we're talking about.
But we have to give people, like, again, going back to the Democratic Party, going back to the Roosevelt report, you have to give people entree into institutions and groups that they feel like actually work and actually have a chance to do something visceral and real, where you can have wins. And a lot of people right now just don't feel that at all when it comes to their government, their community, their local leaders, their state leaders, and so on. Okay, here's our story time for today. You have a minute, Dan? You need to go.
No, I've always got time for the stories, Brad.
So I was, this is where you all are going to make fun of me endlessly. And I know I'm going to hear about it from Dan and everyone else who listens to the show, but I'm going to say, these words are going to sound so pathetic, but I'm going to say it anyway. So here we go. You ready? So, growing up, I was a good soccer player and I was a decent basketball player. And if you've all met me, I'm short. I'm 5'7", right? So we've talked about this. And so somebody in my life should have been like, oops, there goes my camera. We're having a great day. We might need to shut it down. Let's see if I can get my camera back up. Nope, I can't. All right. We're done. We're calling it. I'm going to say my pathetic soccer thing another time. We already had so many tech issues. We're calling it for today. Oh, hey, all of you who joined us, we love you. We're so grateful to get to hang with you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for all the great comments, for spurring conversation and everything else. And just really enjoyed doing this with all of you. Dan, really thankful for you and for us being able to get through the tech difficulties at the start. And here we are at the end and all that. We'll be back tomorrow. It's in the code. We'll have the weekly roundup Friday and more on the horizon. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate you. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Brad.